Welcome to Ponderosa North with the love of Bonanza. Today I'm going to go through some quotes from the cast and the producer and some friends of the show. They had a lot to say. This is just a small sample of all the quotes I've collected, but I'll probably do another show somewhere down the line to pick up the slack of what I've missed. So let's start with Lorne Greene. He says, get yourself a really comfortable bed and a really good pair of shoes because you're going to be in one or the other for the rest of your life. Words to live by from Lorne Greene. He says, we've got to make him a loving father who commands respect through the force of his own personality, a good man, a strong man, a decent man. Lorne talking about Ben Cartwright. He says, Bonanza is now the second most popular export sent out of the United States. We're just behind foreign aid. That was in 1966. Yes, Bonanza plays in hundreds of countries and hundreds of languages around the world, and it has done so for the past, 63 years? At a TV Guide Award ceremony, he says, my 3 sons and I thank you. And he says, when I first saw the Ponderosa, I said to myself, how I'd love to have a house like that someday. Now I have it, just a few hundred yards from the first tee. And that's right, he did build a replica of the Ponderosa in Mesa, Arizona in 1963. It's still there, and the new owners are very adamant about keeping it pristine and up to date, and you can go on a tour of it on YouTube. In later shows, I'll show you more of the inside of the house in Mesa, Arizona. Let's move on to Pernell Roberts. He says, I've been a butcher, forest ranger, soft drink salesman, railroad riveter, welder, and more. I've got the scars to prove it. Yes, he sure does. Here's a picture of Pernell, and if you'll notice, he's got quite a scar on his lip there, and he's got quite a dent in his head. Yes, scars. I'm thinking railroad riveter? Yeah. I always wondered where that scar on his lip came from. I always find scar stories very interesting, so it's probably not as romantic as I think it is. He says, when I first began acting out of loneliness. I figured it would be a good way to meet people. I think that's got to be an only child thing. If you have siblings, you long for loneliness. It's like, leave me alone. So I'm guessing here, but I think that has to do with being an only child. Let's move on here. What else does he have to say? He says, I have a great fear of the corruptive power of money. I'm almost neurotic about it. About his troubles with the show, he says, I just get on, ask someone for the lines and say them. That's all the attention this kind of operation deserves. They have to turn out 34 episodes a season, one every 6 days. So the idea to stay on schedule, get the shot, fill in the 50 minutes, and get on to the next episode. There simply isn't time to stop and inquire about things like dramatic honesty. And he also says, I only have one life to waste. He says, I think I have a good relationship with my co-stars. Oh, I hear stories that might indicate otherwise, but I have no evidence to support that. We get along pretty well. I don't see them socially for good reason. If we were to meet away from the studio, we would naturally fall to talking about our work and the aggravations that come with it. I don't want to get into that. We think differently. They obviously don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. I'm outspoken. We'll let it go at that. And with that, I'm going to move on to Dan Blocker. Dan said, I brushed my teeth yesterday and I lost 12 pounds. Oh, he was a funny guy. He said, my dad used to say I was the onlyest man in Texas that wears a number 14 plus shoe and a size 3 hat. He also said I was too big to ride and too little to hitch to a wagon. No good for a damn thing. Okay. He says, I still can't believe that people are that interested in me. If they don't have anything more to concern themselves with Hoss Cartwright, then what hope is there? You know, if Dr. Salk walked down the street, nobody'd recognize him. I find that terrifying. Well, I guess I'm guilty as charged because I've been a lifelong fan. I've written a book about it. I'm doing a YouTube series about it. But I do know who Dr. Salk is. So rest assured, Dan. Mike knows he can't sing. He's flat. He's off key. Mike isn't kidding himself. But if those jerks will pay him, he'll sing. Oh. He says, I'm an actor. If somebody gives me something that's written down, I can act it. But I can't go on these panel shows where you have to talk. Well, I think he's really underestimating himself. He was a very articulate, smart, funny man who knew everything that was going on in the world. I think he had a lot to add on those shows, but that was up to him. Let's move on to Michael Landon. He says, at the beginning of the show, I was supposed to be playing a 17-year-old. I'm getting gray already. How much of a youthful image can I keep creating? Yeah, Michael Landon became prematurely gray. He colored his hair most of the time. I loved his gray hair. I thought he looked great in gray hair. But yeah, youthful image does not depict gray hair. He says, when the 4 Cartwrights ride out, all of the horses go. You've really got to hold them up. There's an exit sign beside the barn. And I always think of that quote when he says that, when they go around the barn. They must all crash into one another. He says, I really thought the rest of my life was planned. I'd spend 4 years in college, join the service, throw the javelin in the service, maybe even win the Olympics. And yes, as I mentioned before, that was dashed because of injury to his shoulder. He says, it may be hokey, but when a parent writes and says his child is very sick, if I can spend half an hour in the room, that's 30 minutes of the happiest minutes, that's 30 of the happiest minutes of the child's life. Not because of me, Mike Landon, the actor. They don't even know what I look like. What they see is exactly what they expect. Little Joe Cartwright from the Ponderosa. Yes, they did a lot of charity work in character. They had lives of their own, families of their own, and had a very busy schedule, but they found time to spend time in hospitals with kids. And they'd go in character because, yeah, what little kid doesn't want to meet Hoss Cartwright and Ben Cartwright? So kind of them to do that. Let's move on. Where am I? He says, the first day we went back to work after Dan's death, it was just incredible. It was so bad. Everybody was just trying to force good humor because here we were back at the same place again. Fortunately, we stayed out of the dining room that day. We had so many laughs at that dining room over the last 13 years. They were always the deadly scenes. They were so terrible because they were exposition scenes, so you could find out what was going to happen in the next act. And that's where Dan and Lorne and I did most of our horsing around. But what happened since that first day is that the whole crew is full of memories of only good things. Someone will say, hey, do you remember that time you and Dan put that director on? Because we used to torment the hell out of new directors. Moments like that are always happening. I love the dining room scenes. The dining room scenes are my favorite. Whenever I see them show the facade of the Ponderosa, I hope they have do a dining room scene. They're great. All the dining room scenes were great. He says, only one person can operate a show. I don't work by committee. That's Mike. He says, I took his hand in mine and held it. He looked at me and slowly started to arm wrestle like we used to. Then he broke into a smile and nodded, and everything was okay. I think Lorne wanted me to know everything was okay. So obviously Michael Landon visited Lorne when he was ill near the end of his life. So let's move on to our producer, David Dortort. I talk about David Dortort a lot, and here he is. Here's the man, created Bonanza, and his wife, Rose. So he had a lot to say. Why shouldn't he? He says, I've learned one thing. When fortune smiles, best not kick it in the teeth. Good advice. He says, what can I do? Pernell says Adam Cartwright would take notes. Yes, that's true. If you ever notice Pernell, he's very Brando-esque. If you watch him when he's not really involved in a scene, he's kind of off to the side, picking at his teeth or cleaning out his ear or popping a piece of bread in his mouth. He takes things that are at hand to sort of fill the space. And David Dortort sort of rebated his words when he said that, I wished I would have invited Pernell back. I was kind of hard on him, and that he made every scene better. Pernell Roberts was that good, and he was. He says, we're not afraid to show our feelings. A father grieves for an injured son. Brothers are happy to be reunited. A son is grateful to an understanding father. We have made more people cry than anybody in the business. It's true. Michael Landon took props from that, from Little House. He says, the Ponderosa is not just a dusty, down-at-the-heels ranch. There's power, wealth, and permanence there, and as such, it is the most important single home on TV. The great house is the castle of old, its occupants kings, princes, and knights. Fairy tale? I dislike that term, but, well, yes, the honest fairy tale, if you must. Yes, the Ponderosa was definitely the castle with the king and 3 princes. That's the way I always like to think about it. He says, Pernell's not really unhappy. He receives more mail than any of the others. I'll just leave that at that. Let's go on to some co-stars. This is from Dawn Wells. She played Marianne on Gilligan's Island, and she was also in The Way Station. She said, I liked Roberts. I thought he was a good professional actor. Lorne Greene and Michael Landon were warm and friendly, smiling and laughing most of the time. I was fairly new in the business, but they were very helpful to me. I think Pernell Roberts was unhappy with himself at the time. He mostly kept to himself playing his guitar and didn't say much when he wasn't in a scene. Dan Blocker had a good sense of humor. He was always a jolly guy, like a big, warm teddy bear. Yes, isn't that how we think of Dan Blocker? That's nice. This is from TV Guide. This is from Ron Searle in 1965. He says, what has Bonanza got that the others haven't got? The answer is Lorne Greene, Pernell Roberts, Dan Blocker, and Michael Landon, who still retain a sense of belief in the show. The Cartwrights have managed to insulate themselves against the encroachment of better judgment, sex, and the Beatles. What other show can boast a father figure who has almost toppled Ringo Starr from the top 10 with a sentimental ballad called, ironically, Ringo, Ringo, Ringo. Steve McQueen says, what does Mike want? He wants to control it all. James Arness from Gunsmoke says, damn it, I like those guys. Kathy Brown, where is she? Here she is. The fiancée of Adam Cartwright. Why shouldn't end up marrying him is ridiculous. Kathy Brown says, I found him a bit moody, but very interesting to work with. The whole cast is wonderful. I love to work with them. And I'll leave you with this last quote from Victor Sen Young, which I think says it all, who played Hop Sing, of course. He says, I haven't gotten wealthy off anything except experience and friends. That's a great way to end this episode of Ponderosa North for the Love of Bonanza. Like I said, I'll come back a few episodes later and I'll recite the rest of the quotes that I've collected over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years. See you later. Bye.